Why did the wind sound like a warning? That was the first thing she noticed when she stepped into the pass, a sound like a living thing, wailing between the teeth of the mountains. The locals called it the shaitan's breath. Soldiers called it madness in motion. But to Sergeant Eva Rostova, it was just another element to account for. Wind was predictable. People weren't. She moved quietly through the forward operating base, her boots sinking into the dust that clung to everything here: men, machines, hope. The place was called Fob Vigil, though there was little vigilance left in the eyes of the soldiers who watched her walk in. They glanced up from their posts, from their half-finished cigarettes and tired conversations. A woman in combat fatigues, small-framed, a new face among ghosts. She didn't return their stares. She didn't need to. Every step, every shift of her pack against her spine was exact, controlled, calculated, the kind of discipline that didn't come from arrogance but from survival. They'd lost their best man just 2 weeks ago, Sergeant Miller, call sign Hawkeye. A legend, a sniper who'd taken impossible shots and made them look easy until one didn't. The mountains took him, swallowed him whole. His death left a hole no one wanted filled. And yet here she was, his replacement, the epilogue no one wanted to read. She found the command tent, a squat, sand-colored structure humming with power and tension. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and coffee that had died hours ago. A holographic map threw a ghostly blue light over 3 men hunched around it. Captain Reyes looked exhausted, the kind of tired that settled behind the eyes. Corporal Davis leaned against a stack of comms gear, arms crossed, smirking at nothing. And at the head of the table stood General Marcus Thorne, a man carved out of the same rock as these mountains. His face was a map of old wars, his eyes the color of spent gunmetal. Rostova entered, came to attention. Sergeant Eva Rostova, reporting as ordered. Her voice was steady, not loud, not soft, just steady. Reyes gave a nod, but his eyes flickered toward Thorne like a man bracing for a storm. "At ease, Sergeant," the general said finally, his tone carved from stone. "This is Hawkeye's replacement." He didn't hide the word replacement, he weaponized it. His gaze swept over her, slow and dismissive, as if he were inspecting a piece of defective equipment. He saw her rank, her frame, her quiet. Then he made a small sound, half grunt, half sigh. "This is what they send me." He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to the air. "They send this to replace Hawkeye." No one answered. He turned back to the map, a flickering canyon outlined in blue light. "Out there," he said, pointing with a gloved finger, "is a ghost, Omar Al-Hamil, insurgent commander, best marksman we've ever faced. Hawkeye spent 3 weeks hunting him. The wind here eats bullets for breakfast. Then it ate him too." Corporal Davis let a small smirk creep across his face. Worshipping a dead legend was easier than trusting the stranger who replaced him. Rostova didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Thorne looked her over one more time, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You ever seen wind like this, Sergeant? The shaitan's breath. Picks up rocks the size of your fist and throws them 100 yards. 3 different currents between you and the target. You ever shot in that?" She met his gaze evenly. "I've read the meteorological reports for the region, sir." The words were plain, unemotional. And that, more than anything, infuriated him. "Reading isn't doing," he snapped. Hawkeye could feel the wind, he could taste it, and even he couldn't make that shot. The general's hand slammed against the table. "You came from where again?" "Instructor duty, teaching supply clerks how to zero a rifle." The insult hung in the air like a slap. Davis smirked again. Reyes looked down at the floor. Rostova stood silent, motionless. There was something about her stillness. It wasn't defiance, not pride. It was indifference, the calm of a deep ocean that didn't bother to answer storms. Thorne mistook it for weakness. "Get her briefed, Reyes, assign her a spotter. Not that it matters. Command won't authorize an airstrike anyway. She's window dressing." He turned away, She ceased to exist to him. But even ghosts can strike. Ray started the briefing. His voice was steady, but every word carried the exhaustion of too many dead missions. The target's position is deep in a canyon network called the Devil's Anvil. It's a fortress. The only weakness is a small loophole in the observation post. He steps there every sunrise, 30 seconds max. Thorne's eyes narrowed. Distance: 2,247 meters, uphill, across a wind funnel. 40 meters of wind drift, Thorne muttered. A shot like that is impossible. He looked at Rostova. You understand what I'm saying. That's not a shot, that's a prayer, and no woman can make that shot. It wasn't doubt, it was doctrine, a creed carved into the old bones of the military machine. But she didn't argue. She didn't ask to prove herself. She simply said, I'll need current atmospheric density reports, full topography of the canyon, and the last 72 hours of drone wind data. Corporal Davis can pull them for me. It wasn't a request, it was a statement of work. Davis blinked, caught off guard by her composure. Thorne stared at her like he was seeing someone who didn't understand fear or hierarchy. 2 hours, she said to Rays. Then she turned and left. The flap closed behind her. The tent went silent. The general had thrown down his challenge. She hadn't picked it up. She just stepped over it. The ascent began before dawn. The world outside the wire was gray, silent, merciless. The wind hit like a physical thing, pressing against their bodies, grinding sand into their eyes. The route to the Overwatch point was steep, a broken climb through shale and bone-colored rock. Davis carried the spotting scope and comms pack, his breath sharp in the cold air. Rostova carried the rifle, a Barrett M107A1, like it was an extension of her spine. He tried to match her pace. He couldn't. After 2 hours, his frustration finally slipped out. Hawkeye would have taken the western ridge, he muttered. Better cover from the wind. Rostova didn't turn around. The western ridge increases the gravity drop and vertical wind shear. This position keeps the vector stable. He blinked. You already calculated that. She didn't answer. They climbed in silence 8 hours into the teeth of the shaitan's breath. The mountains loomed like sleeping gods. The world shrank to breath, rock, and grit. By dusk, they reached a ledge barely wide enough for 2 people to lie side by side. The wind howled, relentless. Rostova dropped her pack and began to build their hide not for comfort but for precision. Flat stones, weighted camouflage net, everything locked tight. She worked in silence, every movement deliberate. Davis watched her, part irritated, part mesmerized. Hawkeye had been chaos and instinct. She was geometry and control. When she finished, the hide looked invisible, like the mountain had swallowed them whole. Hours passed. The light faded to bruised purple. Ray's voice came through the comms. Vigil to Anvil 1, new intel incoming. A short video feed loaded. Drone footage. Inside the enemy observation post. The target, Omar Al-Hamil, wasn't alone. A man stood beside him, hands bound, face bloodied. A downed pilot, alive. The mission changed in an instant. It was no longer an assassination. It was a rescue with 1 bullet. Thorne's voice growled through the radio, barely containing fury. Anvil 1, copy Sitrep. The target is shielded. I repeat, shielded. Any miss and you kill a friendly. This mission is scrubbed unless you can guarantee a kill. Understood, Rostova replied calmly. But the calm wasn't compliance, it was focus. Davis looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. You can't make that shot, he whispered. Not with the pilot standing in front of him. There's no angle. She didn't answer. She was already scanning the canyon walls, tracing invisible lines with her eyes, mapping light, shadow, and air. Then another message, urgent. Al-Hamil's moving at sunrise. You have 1 window, 1. It was suicide, but she didn't flinch. As the night deepened, she became still, so still that Davis began to forget she was human. She lay behind the Barrett, the cold metal pressed against her cheek, her breathing measured, her heart rate dropping with each exhale. She watched the stars drift, the faint swirl of dust in the canyon, the twitch of desert grass. Every detail became a data point, every whisper of wind, a number in her mind's equation. Davis muttered about the gusts, about barometric pressure, about failure. She listened without hearing. Her world had narrowed to variables: drift, drop, thermal refraction. She saw what others couldn't, not the chaos of wind, but its rhythm. When the horizon began to glow, she whispered her first words in hours. "Stand by." The sun broke. Light spilled over the ridges, painting the canyon gold. The loophole lit up, and a shadow appeared inside. The target, with the hostage in front of him. Davis swore under his breath. "He's shielded. There's no shot, no." "Stand by," she murmured. The radio crackled, Thorne's voice sharp, commanding. "Abort, Sergeant, that's an order." But she didn't move. For one fleeting second, the wind stopped. The shaitan's breath inhaled. And in that stillness, the target turned his head. A 2-inch gap of exposed skin, behind the ear, the kill zone. Her finger tightened, slow, precise. 3 seconds of silence. Then thunder. The shot left the barrel at 2,900 feet per second, vanishing into the wind. Davis held his breath, so did the mountain. 3 seconds later, a red mist. The ghost was gone. And with it, the disbelief that had haunted her since the day she'd arrived. But in the next heartbeat, movement, a second man, dragging the hostage deeper into the cave. "No shot, he's behind cover," Davis shouted. She was already chambering the next round. No calculation, no hesitation, just intuition built from a lifetime of invisible work. She adjusted, shifted 3 feet left, fired. Another 3 seconds of silence. Then a collapse, a shadow falling, a life ending before anyone even realized she had fired again. The pilot stumbled free, alive. And the mountain exhaled. No one spoke for a long time. The sound of that second shot still echoed in the bones of every man listening. Even the wind outside the command tent seemed to pause, as if the mountains themselves were trying to make sense of what had just happened. Inside Fob Vigil, the room was silent, a heavy, stunned kind of silence that pressed down like altitude. The holographic map still glowed, the canyon rendered in pale blue light. A single red marker blinked where the target had been. General Thorne's hand was frozen on the radio. He hadn't finished his last word, the one she'd ignored. Abort. But how do you abort a miracle that's already happened? Captain Ray's was the first to breathe again. It came out as a whisper. Target down, hostage alive. Thorne didn't move. He was staring at the map like he'd just seen something holy and terrifying. Then over the comms, Corporal Davis's voice cracked through the static, breathless, trembling. "Vigil, this is Anvil 1. Target neutralized. Secondary confirmed. Hostage secure." Ray's closed his eyes for half a second, his shoulders sinking, relief mixed with disbelief. "She did it," he murmured. But the general, he didn't look relieved. He looked haunted. For 35 years, Marcus Thorne had lived in a world where men like him wrote the rules, rules about power, courage, and who was allowed to claim them. And now, one quiet woman had shattered those rules with 2 bullets and a silence sharper than any reprimand. He dropped the radio on the table and turned away. "Get me visual confirmation," he ordered, but his voice had lost its edge. It sounded hollow. On the screen, the drone feed flickered, the grainy image stabilizing to show the cave entrance. The hostage, Lieutenant Jensen, was standing in the light, waving frantically toward the sky. Blood on his uniform, sunlight on his face. Alive. Every man in that tent stared. Then Ray spoke softly. "General, we just witnessed the impossible." Thorne didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the corner monitor, the one displaying Rostova's personnel file, the same document he'd skimmed earlier and dismissed with contempt. Instructor duty, ballistics school, the safe end of the gun. He hesitated. Then with a slow, reluctant motion, he tapped the screen. A line of redacted text blinked, then another, until black bars began to dissolve, replaced by words he'd never expected to see. Classified deployments. The Hindu Kush. Operation Glass Veil. Confirmed kills, redacted. He scrolled, his breath caught. There it was, her call sign. Kestrel. He'd heard it before, whispered in after-action reports, in rumors traded between special forces operators in dusty bars. A myth. The ghost sniper who'd ended the siege at the Mbara pipeline with one bullet through a concrete wall. The phantom who'd taken out the Sadek brothers from a moving helicopter, at night. A legend no one believed was real. And now she was standing in his desert, quiet, unassuming, polishing the dust off a rifle that shouldn't have been able to do what it just did. The general's throat felt dry. The weight of his earlier words came back like shrapnel. No woman can make that shot. He had said it like scripture. She had answered with physics and silence. Reyes glanced over his shoulder at the screen. When he saw the name, he froze. His lips parted in disbelief. Kestrel, he whispered. You're telling me she's the Kestrel. Thorne didn't answer. He just stared at the screen, his reflection faint in the glass, a man forced to look at his own smallness. Then quietly, almost to himself, he said, God help me. The trek back to Vigil was longer than the ascent. The storm had lost some of its fury, but the wind still cut through every layer of clothing, sharp as broken glass. Davis followed half a step behind Rostova, his legs aching, his lungs raw from cold air. He hadn't spoken since they left the ledge. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile. He'd seen what she'd done, twice, and no words seemed equal to it. At one point he tried anyway. Ma'am, he started, his voice uncertain. That second shot, how did you? She didn't look back. Math. And intuition. She adjusted the rifle strap on her shoulder, her tone flat. The world tells you what it's doing if you listen closely enough. He stared at her back, the small frame, the steady stride. He'd mocked her once for being too quiet, too calm. Now the silence felt sacred. When they reached the base perimeter, word had already spread. Soldiers stopped what they were doing. Mechanics put down wrenches. Medics stepped out of tents. They didn't cheer, they didn't clap, they just watched. Rostova walked through the middle of them, dust swirling at her boots, the giant rifle across her back, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Davis trailed behind, still in her shadow, feeling something he couldn't name. It wasn't pride exactly. It wasn't even awe, it was reverence. She had done what no one else could, but she carried it like a burden, not a victory. Inside the command tent, General Thorne waited, alone. When she entered, she stopped just inside the flap and stood at attention. The light from the map table painted her face in cold blue. Thorne looked different now. The arrogance was gone, stripped away, leaving a man who looked smaller, older. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt like a courtroom where both already knew the verdict. Finally, Thorne took a breath, at ease. She didn't move. He nodded once, a soldier's acceptance of quiet defiance. Then slowly he came around the table. His eyes met hers. The man who'd mocked her, doubted her, dismissed her. He stood in front of her, a man built from command, now confronted by competence that needed none. Then, without a word, he raised his right hand. It was not the brisk salute of authority. It was the slow, deliberate gesture of surrender, the kind of salute a soldier gives not to rank but to respect. Rostova's gaze didn't waver. She returned it, precise, brief, perfect. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The silence that followed, was the sound of balance being restored. That night the shaitan's breath finally died. The base lay under a rare stillness, broken only by the distant hum of generators and the faint clink of metal. In her quarters, Eva Rostova sat at a small table lit by a single lamp. Her rifle lay disassembled in front of her, its pieces lined up in exact order on a canvas cloth. She worked slowly, methodically, cleaning each part with care. The smell of oil and solvent filled the room. Every motion was ritual, not routine. This was how she made sense of the world, through precision, through control. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she said, not looking up. Captain Reyes stepped inside, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Steam rose between them. "Figured you could use this." "Thank you, sir." He handed her one and sat down on a crate opposite her. For a moment, he just watched her hands, her focus, the quiet hum of discipline. "How do you talk to a living myth?" he said softly, almost to himself. She didn't look up. "You don't." He smiled faintly. "Lieutenant Jensen's stable. He'll make a full recovery. He knows who saved him." She said nothing. Reyes leaned forward. "The name Kestrel, we've heard stories. No one ever thought they were true. Turns out they don't do you justice." Finally she looked up. Her eyes were calm, a shade too calm. "They're just stories, Captain. Someone had to pull the trigger, that's all." "To you, maybe," he said quietly. "But to people like Jensen, it's salvation. And to people like Thorne, it's a lesson." She set down the cloth, reassembling the bolt with a clean, metallic click. He hesitated, then said, "You showed him something today. You showed all of us." Rostova slid the bolt back into place. "Did I?" "You showed him the future." She didn't respond. Her silence was answer enough. Reyes finished his coffee, set the mug down. "You carry it well, Sergeant, the quiet, the name, all of it." When he left, closing the door softly behind him, she was alone again. She placed the final piece into the rifle, testing the motion, feeling the smooth precision of the mechanism. It slid into place with the clean sound of inevitability. Then she stood, carrying the rifle to the window. Outside, the mountains were silver in the moonlight, silent, endless, eternal. She looked at them for a long time. There was no smile, no satisfaction, just a quiet stillness, the kind that comes when you've done the one thing you were meant to do. The world would make stories out of it, they always did, but for her it was simple, a calculation solved, a life saved, a silence kept. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the wind began to rise again, faint, whispering, uncertain. She watched the darkness move through the peaks and whispered, almost to the air, "It's never about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right." And then she closed the case. The latch clicked soft, final. The mountains slept, and the legend of Kestrel returned to silence. What makes a legend? It's never the medals or the kills or the stories men tell afterward. It's the things they don't talk about, the quiet moments, the regrets, the loneliness of being exceptional in a world that mistrusts silence. Eva Rostova knew that better than anyone. In the still hours after the mission, while the base slept, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sleep never came easily after a kill, not because of guilt, but because of the stillness that followed. The world always felt too quiet after violence. She turned over, the cot creaking beneath her. The air smelled of dust and gun oil. Somewhere outside, a generator coughed to life. Her mind drifted, unbidden, back to the place where it all began. Years earlier, another desert, another wind. A younger Eva sat cross-legged in the sand, a sniper rifle resting across her lap. The horizon shimmered with heat. The instructor's voice was sharp in her ear. "Rostova, what's the first rule of distance shooting?" She didn't look up. "Respect the wind." "And the second?" "Don't respect the man who underestimates you." A ripple of laughter ran through the training line, mostly men, all older, all louder. She didn't react. She adjusted her scope, her eyes fixed on a steel target 2 kilometers away. The instructor frowned. "Smart mouth, let's see if it matches your aim." The wind picked up, teasing sand across her face. She blinked it away, feeling it on her cheek, the texture, the speed, the way it carried warmth on one side and cold on the other. Her finger brushed the trigger. One breath, too. The shot cracked like thunder. A moment later, a distant, perfect ping. The line went quiet. The instructor blinked, then lowered his binoculars slowly. "You got lucky." She didn't respond. She just chambered the next round. Luck, they'd always called it. Even after Quantico, even after the advanced marksmanship course. They said her calculations were uncanny, her control unnatural, as if precision was witchcraft. They didn't know about her nights as a child, growing up in the outskirts of Yekaterinburg, staring through a cracked window at falling snow. She used to count seconds between wind gusts, timing the rhythm of the storm. It soothed her, made the world make sense. Her father was an engineer. He used to say, "Everything moves by pattern, Eva. Even chaos has a heartbeat." He died when she was 12, a car crash in a storm. After that, the silence in their apartment became unbearable. The only thing that still made sense was listening. Listening to wind, to weight, to motion. By the time she enlisted, silence was not a void to her. It was language. Years later, when the Pentagon classified her as kestrel, she stopped being a person. She became a solution, a name spoken in operations briefings where failure was not an option. No unit, no country tag, just coordinates and clearance codes. Her missions were the kind that never reached headlines, quiet eliminations, shadow interventions, the ones labeled deniable. One operation still lived behind her eyelids, the one she never spoke of. Afghanistan, the Hindu Kush. They'd called it Operation Glass Veil. A convoy of humanitarian workers had been taken hostage by a splinter cell high in the mountains, unreachable by air, too fortified for a ground team. The order came down: neutralize the cell's commander before dawn. She'd been dropped 3 kilometers out alone. No spotter, no comms, just coordinates, a rifle, and the knowledge that a dozen innocent lives were hanging on her calculation. The wind was worse there, colder, thinner, erratic. It screamed through the valleys like a living thing. She'd spent hours crawling across rock and snow, her body pressed to the earth, her breath fogging the scope. When she finally saw the target, a figure standing by a lantern inside a ruined mosque, she felt that old stillness again, the kind that comes before something irreversible. She adjusted for distance, for drift, for spin. Then she hesitated. There was a child beside him, a boy maybe 8. The order had been clear: kill the commander before sunrise. But orders never mentioned witnesses. The wind shifted, whistling through the broken dome above the boy's head. For a moment she thought she heard a whisper in it, her father's voice, faint as snow. "Everything moves by pattern, Eva, even chaos." She breathed once, held it, waited for the boy to step back. He didn't. The commander moved instead, turning just enough to reveal a strip of bare neck. A 2-inch window. She took it. The shot tore through the cold air, cutting him down instantly. The boy dropped to his knees, clutching at the body. The lantern flickered and died. The mission was a success. 12 hostages lived. But that image, the boy's small hands on the blood, the silence that followed never left her. That was the night she stopped listening to applause. Because victory and loss had begun to sound the same. A soft knock pulled her back to the present. The door opened slightly. Davis. He looked uncertain, like a man standing outside a church he didn't belong in. "Ma'am." She nodded once. "Come in." He hesitated before stepping inside. His uniform was dusty, his face still raw from the climb. In his hand, he held something, the spent casing from her first shot. "I thought you might want this." She looked at it, the brass catching the lamplight. Then she shook her head. "Keep it." He blinked. "I don't understand." "It's yours now," she said simply. "You were there, you saw." He looked down at the casing like it was sacred. "I've seen men take impossible shots before, but not like that. It was different." Rostova's voice was quiet. "The shot is never the hard part." "What is?" She looked at him, really looked. The youngness still in his eyes, the part that hadn't yet learned what silence costs. "Living with what it means." Davis swallowed. "If you don't mind me asking, were you really?" "Yes," she said before he finished. "But that name doesn't matter anymore." "Kestrel." She didn't answer. She just reached out and gently pushed the casing back toward him. "Don't carry stories that aren't yours." He nodded, but his expression said he would anyway. Some names were too heavy to leave behind. When he left, she sat alone again, staring at the faint ring of oil on the table where the casing had rested. Outside, the wind began to rise softer this time, as if remembering her. Across the base, in the command tent, General Thorne sat with Captain Reyes. The old man looked changed. The years seemed to have caught up all at once, settling into the creases of his face. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a metal cup and stared at it. 35 years I've been doing this," he said quietly. "I thought I'd seen everything." Reyes didn't speak. Thorne took a slow sip. "When I said no woman could make that shot, I wasn't just talking about the wind or the distance. I was talking about myself, my own blindness." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Turns out the wind wasn't the only thing full of hot air." Reyes smiled faintly. "She didn't come here to prove you wrong, sir." "I know," Thorne said, his voice almost breaking. "That's what makes it worse. She didn't come to prove anything. She just did her job, better than any of us ever could." The 2 men sat in silence. The hum of electronics filled the space. After a while, Reyes asked softly, "What now?" Thorne looked toward the tent flap, toward the quiet barracks beyond. "Now, we make sure the world never forgets her, even if she wishes we would." Later that night, Eva stood outside, the desert air cold against her face. She watched the horizon, dark ridges against a field of stars. She thought of the boy in the mosque, the pilot she'd saved, the men who doubted her, the silence that had followed every shot. And she realized something she hadn't before. All her life, she'd been told what she was. Too quiet, too small, too soft. They built cages out of words and called them truth. But the moment the trigger broke, those cages shattered. Because truth doesn't speak, it acts. She exhaled slowly, letting the wind take her breath, her memories, her ghosts. Then she whispered, "Rest, Hawkeye." The night answered with a faint echo, as if the mountain itself was saluting. And somewhere deep inside her, for the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. How long does silence last after a miracle? At Fob Vigil, it lasted 3 days. 3 days of whispers and glances, of stories told in low voices near the generator lights. Soldiers didn't talk about the mission, they studied it. They replayed the drone footage, the shot, the second shot, the salute. They debated whether it was even humanly possible. Some called it luck, some called it divine, most just called it her. But Eva Rostova, she said nothing. She never corrected them, never accepted their praise. She ate with the others, cleaned her rifle, logged her reports. Routine was her camouflage. And still, the wind never stopped. It carried her legend from tent to tent, across barracks into headquarters, across continents. Within a week, her name reached command briefings back home, the kind where generals used coffee cups to mark kill zones. And the name wasn't Rostova. It was Kestrel. The 4th night after the shot, Captain Reyes found her sitting outside her barracks, boots unlaced, staring at the horizon. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "I wasn't trying," she said. He nodded, sitting beside her on the sandbag. The night was cold enough to sting. You heard what's coming. She didn't look at him. Orders. He sighed. You're being recalled. The words hung between them. Rostova didn't flinch. On whose authority? Higher than mine, Reyes said. Way higher. Washington's taking an interest. They're sending a transport tomorrow. She turned slightly, her profile lit by the dull glow of the floodlight. Why? He hesitated. They don't say why, Sergeant. They just send coordinates. Her eyes narrowed. It's not a debrief. No, Reyes admitted. It's evaluation, political theater. They want to make sense of what you did or take credit for it. She looked back at the horizon, where the ridges of the Shaitan Pass glimmered faintly in the moonlight. Miracles make men uncomfortable, she said softly, especially the kind they didn't order. Reyes smiled faintly. You're not wrong. They sat in silence for a long time. The wind moved gently across the sand, whispering through the bass like an old story retold. Finally Reyes asked, You ever regretted the missions, the quiet? Rostova took a slow breath. Regret is a luxury. It slows the math. He studied her face, calm, unreadable. Math can't save you from everything. I know, she said, but it helps you survive the parts that regret can't. The next morning, she packed in silence. No one came to see her off, not out of disrespect, but out of reverence. Some things are too large for ceremony. Davis appeared just as the transport rotor blades began to spin. His expression was caught between pride and guilt. He tried to speak but couldn't, so he just handed her a small envelope, unmarked. What's this? She asked. Something you should see, he said. Then he saluted, crisp, formal, awkward. You changed the way I look at everything. She nodded once, then make sure it stays changed. The wind caught the words and carried them away. Moments later, she was gone. The Capitol airfield was sterile, too clean, too white, too still. A black convoy waited on the tarmac, men in suits, not uniforms, no insignia, no warmth. They drove her through the city in silence, past monuments of marble and steel, a world that pretended to understand sacrifice. When they stopped, it was in front of a low, windowless building. No markings, just a flag and a security camera that never blinked. Inside, the air smelled of recycled air and ambition. A woman in a gray suit met her, sharp eyes, sharper smile. Sergeant Rostova, I'm Director Hayes, please sit. Eva sat. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hides microphones. Hayes folded her hands. I'll be honest with you, Sergeant. You've created quite a situation for us. Rostova tilted her head slightly. By following orders. By surpassing them. Hayes smiled thinly. Do you understand what 2 confirmed kills at over 2,000 meters means for our public narrative? Eva didn't answer. Hayes leaned forward. It means we can't control it. You've become a symbol. Symbols are unpredictable. Rostova's tone stayed calm. Then you should destroy them before they start meaning something. The director blinked, not expecting that. You're remarkably self-aware. I'm a sniper, Rostova said. I study patterns, even human ones. Hayes stood, circling her slowly. You've been off the grid for years, operating under layers of classification even I barely had access to. Then suddenly, you surface here, make the shot of the century, and now every chain of command wants to claim you. The Army, CIA, Special Activities, even NATO. Rostova's expression didn't change. Tell them all I'm just a soldier. Hayes gave a short laugh. You're not just anything, you're leverage. For the first time, something flickered in Eva's eyes, not fear, not anger, disappointment. Leverage breaks, she said quietly. The meeting stretched for hours. Questions layered over questions about trajectories, tactics, motives. Hayes wanted to know how she'd done it, what calculations she'd used, what intuition she'd trusted. But every answer was simple, stripped bare of ego. I read the wind. I trusted the math. I took the shot. No explanations, no embellishments, just truth. When it ended, Hayes closed the folder and leaned back. You realize we could use you, train others, write doctrine, build programs around your methods. Rostova stood slowly. You don't train instinct. Everything can be trained. She met the woman's gaze, calm, unwavering. Not what you're trying to name. And with that, she left. Outside, the sky had darkened. A storm was building, real this time, not metaphor. The wind howled down the empty streets, rattling the flagpoles like old bones. She walked alone, coat pulled tight, her boots echoing against the concrete. The envelope from Davis was still in her pocket. She'd almost forgotten it. She ducked under an awning and opened it. Inside was a single photograph. The rescued pilot, Jensen, smiling weakly from a hospital bed. A short note scrawled beneath. You didn't just hit the target, you hit the world. Her fingers tightened around the photo. For the first time in days, she felt something shift inside. A small, almost imperceptible ache. Not pride, not relief, something older. Hope. 2 days later, a message reached her encrypted, unsigned. One more job, not official. Humanitarian convoy under threat, coordinates attached, optional engagement. Optional. That word didn't exist in her world. She stared at it for a long time. Somewhere deep in the desert, people she would never meet were in danger. Command wouldn't act, the politics were too messy, the risk too high. And yet the message had found her. She could have ignored it, she could have chosen peace. But peace, she realized, had never chosen her. That night she unpacked the Barrett. The familiar sound of steel sliding against steel filled the small apartment. She cleaned the barrel, adjusted the scope, reassembled the weapon. Each click echoed like a heartbeat. Then she packed it again, not as Kestrel, not as Rostova, but as something nameless, something inevitable. When dawn broke, she was gone. No orders, no witnesses, no permission. Just a woman walking into the wind, toward a place where equations ended and conviction began. Back at FOB Vigil, Captain Reyes received a coded update through an old secure channel, one that hadn't been used since her mission. It was a short transmission. No coordinates, no names. Just 3 words. Target lives complete. He stared at it for a long moment, then smiled, not with joy, but with something like reverence. He whispered to himself, she doesn't miss. General Thorne stood behind him, silent, his eyes softening. Maybe that's what scares them, he said. Not that she can hit anything, but that she only shoots when it matters. Reyes looked up. You think we'll ever see her again? Thorne shook his head. No, and that's how it's supposed to be. The old soldier walked to the flap, staring out into the wind that had once mocked her and now carried her name like a prayer. He murmured almost to himself, sometimes the quiet ones aren't ghosts, they're guardians. Far away, on a nameless ridge overlooking a war that would never make the news, Eva lay prone behind her rifle, her breath even, her eye to the glass, the wind whispering secrets through her hair. Somewhere below, men moved unaware of her, unaware of the equation already closing around them. She exhaled once, soft and steady. Then the desert swallowed the sound. No witnesses, no medals, no myths. Only precision. Only purpose. Only silence. What happens to a legend when the noise fades? For most, it ends in parades or politics, medals pinned by men who never felt recoil. But for Eva Rostova, it ended in silence. And from that silence, something else began. The wind was different in this desert. Colder. Less personal. She crouched behind a broken wall, scanning the horizon through her scope. Down below, a convoy of white trucks crawled through the valley, a humanitarian route she'd been asked, unofficially, to protect. 3 days earlier, she'd been sitting in a rented room in a nameless border town when the encrypted message appeared again. Same code, same brevity. Civilians targeted, you'll understand. No sender, no command seal, just coordinates. She didn't ask who sent it, she didn't need to. Sometimes, purpose doesn't come with permission. Through the lens, she watched the convoy inch forward, 12 trucks, 2 armored vehicles, 1 open flatbed with supplies for a refugee camp. And in the distance, dust, a line of it. Movement. She adjusted the focus. Small figures emerging from the haze, armed, fast, riding pickup trucks with mounted guns. Her pulse didn't change. Her breathing didn't change. The equation began to form in her mind: wind direction, bullet drop, distance, velocity. She could end this before it started. But something stopped her. Through the scope, she saw one of the approaching trucks slow. The men inside weren't shouting, weren't careless. They moved with coordination, discipline. Not raiders, soldiers. Someone had tipped them off. Her finger rested on the trigger guard. She waited. Below, the convoy halted. Drivers stepped out, confused, nervous. Then a flash. The first explosion hit the lead truck. She flinched, not at the sound but at the speed. A perfect ambush. Her hand steadied, her mind cleared. Wind from the east, 40 meters per second, cross-vector compression at the valley mouth. Distance, 1,960 meters. Her finger found the trigger. One shot. The lead gunner fell. Second shot. Another engine stopped screaming. But it wasn't enough. The convoy was burning. Men and women ran for cover. She scanned left, searching for a pattern. That's when she saw him. A figure standing on a ridge across from her position. Rifle raised, long barrel, heavy stock. Sniper. Her eyes narrowed. Whoever he was, he'd been waiting. The duel was silent, 2 ghosts across a canyon of wind. He fired first. The bullet hit close, sending dust over her cheek. She adjusted her scope. No time for math, just instinct. A flicker of movement there. She fired. Missed. He shifted again. Then she saw it, the way the wind dragged the smoke from his barrel. A rightward curl, tight rotation. She smiled faintly, a familiar rhythm. She whispered, "You're reading it backwards." Her third shot split the air. This time silence followed. She exhaled. Across the valley, the enemy sniper slumped forward, motionless. By the time she reached the convoy, the fighting was over. Smoke curled into the pale sky. The smell of diesel and ash clung to everything. A medic approached her, young, shaken. "Who are you?" "No one," she said. He stared, then pointed at the ridge. "You saved us. Those men, they were professionals. Who sent you?" She shook her head. "You should leave before they send more." He looked at her like he wanted to ask 100 questions, but her tone left no space for them. By the time the survivors loaded back into their trucks, she was already gone, back into the rocks, back into the wind. That night she sat alone by a dying fire. The stars were sharp above her, the kind that made you feel small enough to disappear. She cleaned her rifle with the same care as always, but her hands hesitated once, just once, when she reached the bolt. Her thumb brushed a small notch near the trigger housing, a scratch. She remembered it. Afghanistan, the night of the boy. The scar on the weapon was the only mark she'd ever allowed herself to keep. Her eyes softened. The wind moved through her hair like a whisper. She thought of the convoy, of the people who would live because she'd acted outside of orders. And then she thought of the sniper she'd killed. Who had he been? Mercenary, soldier, another phantom like her, answering a call no one else could hear. Sometimes the barrel points both ways. Back at headquarters, news of the ambush reached Washington before sunrise. The report was full of gaps, Unknown operative intervened. Sniper precision, unknown origin. Director Hayes read it twice, then leaned back in her chair. A single word escaped her lips, Kestrel. She picked up the phone. Get me General Thorne. Halfway across the world, the call reached him in his office at the training compound. General, Hayes said, your ghost is flying again. Thorne's jaw tightened. Where? She gave him the coordinates. He looked out the window at the mountain range beyond the glass. You can't cage her, Director. I'm not trying to cage her, Hayes said. I'm trying to find out whose war she's fighting now. Thorne didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. The same one she's always fought, the quiet kind. 2 weeks later, Eva found herself in a refugee camp. Rows of white tents shimmered under the noon sun. Children ran barefoot through the dust, chasing a deflated soccer ball. Aid workers moved with weary grace, distributing water, patching wounds. She walked among them unnoticed, just another dusty uniform. A woman handed her a bottle of water. You were with the convoy. Eva nodded. You saved us. I was nearby. The woman smiled. Sometimes nearby is enough. That night, one of the aid workers, an older man named Yusuf, joined her by the fireside. His hands trembled from years of exhaustion. You're not here for long, he said, not as a question. No. He nodded. The world doesn't let quiet souls stay. She glanced at him. What makes you think I'm quiet? He smiled faintly. Because you listen before you speak. She looked back at the flames. Listening, easy when you've run out of things worth saying. He studied her face, then said softly, I've seen your kind before. People who can kill from far away but who stay to see what they saved. You carry both weights. She didn't respond. After a long pause, he said, a rifle is not a curse, but it is never free. She met his gaze. Neither is silence. At dawn, the camp stirred. Children laughed. Life somehow continued. But on the horizon, a dust plume was rising, dark, fast, deliberate. Another convoy. Eva raised her binoculars. Trucks, black paint, military pattern. Too many to count. Her pulse steadied. War never sleeps, it just changes names. By mid-morning she was gone again, rifle on her back, boots cutting through sand. No orders, no backup. Only the sound of wind, constant, familiar, almost comforting now. It whispered around her like an old friend. She paused at the ridge, looking back once at the camp, the tents, the people who still believed in help. Then she whispered something only the wind could carry. Not this time. And she vanished over the rise. Hours later, General Thorne received another message. No sender, no encryption this time, just a single line typed into his classified inbox. Justice isn't a uniform, it's a choice. He read it twice, then he closed his eyes and smiled. Good hunting, Sergeant, he whispered. Far out in the dunes, Eva Rostova lay prone again, scope glinting in the fatting sun, her breath calm, her pulse steady. The wind moved like a living thing around her, tugging at the barrel, whispering to her skin. She listened, and when she exhaled, the desert held its breath. Somewhere below, engines roared, men shouted, the same old story of power and fear. And in that storm of chaos, she found stillness. She adjusted her scope, her finger resting on the trigger. There were no orders this time, no voices in her ear, no one to salute or defy. Only the target, only the distance, only the truth that had followed her across every battlefield. That the hardest shots are never about what you hit. They're about what you choose to protect. She fired once. The sound disappeared into the wind. And when the dust settled, the world for a moment was quiet again. How long can you stay invisible before the world decides to look for you? For months, Eva Rostova drifted through the world like smoke, never staying in one place, never leaving traces. Villages whispered her name. Soldiers told stories they couldn't prove. Convoys that should have been massacred made it through untouched. Some said she was an angel, others a ghost. The truth was simpler. She was tired. In a small border town, far from any official map, Eva sat in a cafe that smelled of diesel and rain. Her hair was shorter now, her uniform replaced by a plain jacket. The Barrett rifle dismantled, hidden in a canvas duffel beneath the table. Outside, the street hummed with life, vendors calling, children running, an old radio playing something soft and broken. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. Then she saw them. 3 men, civilian clothes, clean boots, eyes that scanned too often. They weren't locals. She didn't move, just watched their reflection in the window glass. The first one leaned against the doorway, pretending to smoke. The second sat at the bar, facing the exit. The third, the one with the watch tan and the slight limp, lifted a phone to his ear. They didn't know she'd seen them. She stood slowly, left a few bills on the table and stepped out the back door. The alley behind the cafe was narrow, full of broken crates and the smell of dust. She moved quietly, not running, just walking faster than the wind. At the end of the alley she paused, looked up, rooftop vantage, one escape route. She slung the duffel over her shoulder and climbed. By the time the men reached the alley, it was empty. Only the faint sound of wind. That night she found shelter in an abandoned observation post on the ridge overlooking the town. The walls were crumbling, the floor littered with shell casings and cigarette filters, ghosts of soldiers who'd once waited here too. She built a small fire, small enough not to show. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts weren't. They'd found her, not by accident. The question was who, it was why now. She pulled the folded photograph from her pocket, the one Davis had given her months ago. Jensen, the rescued pilot, smiling from a hospital bed. She looked at it for a long time. The ink had faded slightly. Then she whispered, "They don't forgive miracles." Across the ocean, in a high-security briefing room in Virginia, Director Hayes stood in front of a screen showing a satellite feed of the same town. "She's been active again," she said. Her tone was calm, clipped. 3 engagements in as many weeks. Precision strikes, no civilian casualties, but all outside authorization. General Thorne sat across from her, arms folded. His face was older now, the lines deeper, the eyes heavier. He didn't respond right away. Hayes continued, "She's too good, too independent. The media's calling her a myth again, a sniper without allegiance. Every time she acts, we lose control of the narrative." Thorne finally spoke. His voice was gravel. "She's saving lives." "She's undermining command," Hayes countered. "If the world starts believing one soldier can act above orders, the entire chain of authority collapses." Thorne stared at her. "So what's the play?" She hesitated. "Containment. Quietly. We can't risk her being taken by another power or leaking classified operations. We send a retrieval team, non-lethal if possible." "And if not?" Her silence was the answer. Thorne leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "You want to hunt the best shot in modern history. Alone, self-sufficient, paranoid, and righteous. Good luck." Hayes didn't flinch. "That's why we'll send someone she trusts." He frowned. "Who?" The door opened. Captain Reyes stepped in. Reyes looked different, beard grown in, eyes older, posture heavier. But the steadiness was still there. "Sir," he greeted. Thorne sighed. "You shouldn't be here for this." "I volunteered," Reyes said. "If anyone going to bring her in, it should be me." Hayes handed him a tablet. "Coordinates. She's operating along the northern corridor. You find her, you talk her down. No violence unless necessary." Reyes stared at the screen for a long time. Then he said softly, You don't talk her down, you listen her down. Thorne's eyes met his. The weight of what wasn't said hung between them. When Reyes left the room, the general muttered under his breath, "Bring her home, Captain. Don't let them turn her into a target." The desert night was cold when he found her. He didn't announce himself, just approached the faint glow of her fire, his rifle slung across his shoulder. She didn't look surprised when she saw him, just tired. "Captain Reyes," she said quietly, "you shouldn't have come." He sat down opposite her. "Neither should you." They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Finally she said, "They sent you to kill me." He shook his head. "To bring you in." "Same thing." He didn't argue. She poured water into a small tin cup and handed it to him. "You drink." "Not lately." "Good." He took the cup anyway, his fingers brushing hers. "You're making them nervous, Eva. Every time you act, the higher-ups lose a little more control. They can't explain you." "I'm not here to be explained." "They don't see it that way." "I know." She looked into the fire, her face lit with orange light. "Do you remember what you told me at Vigil, that I showed him the future?" Reyes nodded slowly. "I think you were wrong," she said. "I didn't show him the future. I reminded him that it already existed and he'd just been ignoring it." Reyes smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you'd say right before disappearing again." She looked at him, really looked. "I can't disappear forever. None of us can." "Then come back," he said. "We'll fix this." She shook her head. "They don't want me fixed. They want me predictable." Reyes leaned forward. "Eva, they're afraid of what they don't control, but if you come in, I can protect you. Thorne still believes in you, so do I." Her expression softened just for a second. "Belief isn't armor, Captain." "No," he said, "but it's the only thing left when everything else is gone." The silence stretched again. The fire hissed, the wind moved through the cracks in the wall. Finally she stood. "I can't go with you." "Why?" "Because they'll make me forget why I started." He stood too. "Then what's next? You'll just keep running, keep shooting ghosts." Her eyes found the horizon, "Until the wind stops." Reyes exhaled, defeated but understanding. "Then at least take this." He reached into his pocket and handed her a small, worn patch, the insignia of their old unit. She took it, fingers brushing the fabric. "I thought I burned mine." "I kept it," he said, "for when you decided to come home." She smiled, a real fragile smile. "Maybe someday." He nodded, then turned away. But as he reached the door, she said softly, "Tell the general not to salute ghosts." He paused. He already stopped. Now he just waits for the wind. She didn't answer. By the time he looked back, she was gone, the fire dying, the sand already covering her tracks. 2 days later, Reyes reported back to headquarters. "Contact made," he said. "No hostility, she's alive." Hayes leaned forward. "Location?" He hesitated, lost her trail. Hayes frowned. "Captain." Thorne interrupted. "He did his job." The director looked between them. "You're protecting her." Thorne's voice was calm. "We're respecting her. She's a liability." "She's a legend," Thorne said, "and legends don't die in handcuffs." That night the general sat alone in his office. The window was open, and the wind moved gently through the room, a familiar sound, like an old friend returning. On his desk lay a sealed envelope. No markings, no stamp, just his name written in a hand he recognized. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single note. "The wind still listens." And beneath it, the unit patch he'd given her years ago returned. He smiled quietly. Then he stood, straightened his uniform, and saluted the empty air. Outside, the trees bent with the wind. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Eva Rostova Kestrel was still watching. Still waiting. Still listening. The world would keep writing stories about her, twisting facts into myth. But the truth was simpler. She hadn't disappeared. She just moved where silence was needed most. How long can you run before the reason you started catches up? For nearly a year, Eva Rostova had lived in the cracks of the world. Different names, different borders. She taught ballistics to shepherds in the mountains, traded her precision for anonymity, and convinced herself she was finished. But the past doesn't end, it recalculates. It started with a radio. A cheap, battered thing she'd picked up from a market stall for the comfort of static. Most nights it played fragments of foreign songs, news in languages she half understood. Until one night it didn't. The voice came in broken bursts, military cadence under civilian disguise. Chemical stockpiles, coastal city, relief convoy compromised. She sat up slowly, turning the dial until the words came clear. Confirmed rogue detachment inside Allied command structure. Civilian casualties imminent. Repeat, civilians. Coordinates encrypted in standard echelon cipher. The radio hissed and died. She stared at it, then reached for her field notebook. Her pencil scratched across the page, letters, numbers, rhythms. Old instincts woke like a heartbeat she'd tried to forget. Within minutes, the cipher unraveled. Coordinates appeared, 36 degrees N, 58 degrees E. A city she knew. Once beautiful, now under siege by its own. She sat there for a long time, the desert wind pushing against the tent flap. No orders, no allies, just that familiar question pressing in the dark. If you can stop it and you, what are you then? 3 days later, she was on a freight truck heading south. Dust rose behind them like ghosts. The driver, a thin man with calloused hands, glanced at her rifle case. You going to a war? She looked out the window. No, she said softly, trying to stop one. He didn't ask again. The city appeared out of the haze near dawn, half rubble, half refusal. Smoke coiled from the industrial quarter. In the east, the harbor burned. She found the high ground on an abandoned hotel roof. From there she could see everything. The docks, the crowd of civilians penned between barricades, the armored vehicles forming a slow ring. And then she saw him. The officer giving the orders. Not a foreign enemy. An Allied commander gone rogue, turning an evacuation into an execution to cover up stolen weapons. She steadied her breath. The shot was clean, simple, even. But as she lined up the scope, she saw the reflection in a nearby window. A child pressed against the glass inside a school, watching the same horror she was. She hesitated, because she remembered another child, years ago, in the cold of another war. And the memory shook her aim. She exhaled, forced the world to shrink again, one number at a time. Wind, range, drift. Purpose. She didn't need permission. She never had. She fired once. The commander fell. Then she fired again, at the fuel truck beside the armored line. The explosion tore through the barricade, scattering soldiers, clearing a path for the trapped civilians. For a few seconds, the city breathed. Down below, chaos turned to movement, people running, shouting, breaking free. But the victory was short. From the west, another column advanced, reinforcements answering no flag. Too many. She switched to radio channel 5, an old encrypted band. Vigil, do you copy? She said quietly, though she didn't expect an answer. Static then. Rostova. It was Captain Ray's. She almost laughed, still listening. You're in the city. Not for long. What's your position? High temporary. There was a pause. We have drones overhead. Tell me what you need. Evac corridor, eastern pier, civilians moving now. Understood. Then his voice softened. You know they're watching, right? Hayes, the board, everyone. If you fire again, they'll call it treason. She looked through the scope at the flood of terrified faces below. If saving them is treason, she said, I've been guilty my whole life. The next minutes blurred, gunfire, shouting, the heavy thump of artillery. Through it all, she stayed calm, adjusting, firing, covering the retreat like a machine carved from patience. Then a flash, something streaking from the corner of her vision. A drone missile, small, precise, guided. Not enemy. Friendly. The roof erupted. She hit the ground hard, ears ringing, smoke swallowing the world. Through the haze, she heard a voice in her earpiece, Ray's frantic. Eva, they've launched on your position. Get out now. She crawled to the edge, half blind, lungs burning. Below, civilians were boarding boats pushing away from the pier. She smiled faintly. Corridor held, she whispered. Then she dropped her rifle first, then herself, sliding down the shattered stairwell. Hours later, the city was silent again, smoke trailing out to sea. News networks would call it a chemical plant detonation. No mention of civilians. No mention of a sniper who'd bought their escape. Somewhere offshore on a small rescue vessel, Ray stood on the deck watching the skyline. His radio crackled once. Static, then a single breath. He closed his eyes. She's alive, he said quietly. And she was half a kilometer down the coast, washed up among driftwood and wreckage. Her hands trembled as she pulled herself upright. Blood streaked her temple. The rifle lay half buried in sand, dented but intact. She sat beside it until night fell. The pain came and went, but the silence stayed. Not the peace she wanted, something deeper, heavier. She thought of Ray's, of Thorne, of the director who would never understand. She thought of the child in the window who might still be alive, because she'd fired one more time. And for the first time, she wondered if ghosts could rest while still breathing. Across the ocean, Director Hayes faced the press. An industrial accident, she said evenly. No American personnel involved. Thorne stood beside her, silent, jaw clenched. When the briefing ended, he followed her into the hallway. You tried to erase her, he said quietly. She left me no choice. She gave you every choice, he snapped. You just picked the comfortable one. Hayes met his eyes. She's rogue. We can't let one soldier decide who lives and dies. Thorne's voice softened. That's what command does every day. He turned and walked away. In a hospital along the coast, a doctor stitched a nameless woman's wound while she pretended not to understand the questions. Name, he asked again. She looked at him and said, Kestrel. He smiled politely, assuming it was a local word, and wrote unknown on the chart. Later, alone in the ward, she stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly above her. Each rotation ticked like a clock, marking time she no longer owed anyone. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something damp and wrinkled. The unit patch Ray's had once returned to her. She pressed it to her chest, closed her eyes and whispered, almost done. Outside, dawn crept over the shattered coastline. The gulls moved like white shadows against the sky. Somewhere far inland, men in rooms of glass and steel were already rewriting the story, removing her name, reshaping her actions into silence. But in the camps along the pier, people remembered. They spoke of a woman on a rooftop who'd held off an army so they could live. They didn't know her name. They just called her the wind that listens. And for Eva Rostova, that was enough. They never found her rifle. That's how the story began to fade, quietly, almost politely, the way truth always does when it makes too many people uncomfortable. The official report stopped mentioning a sniper. The headlines shifted back to politics. And somewhere in the static between channels, her name dissolved. But legends don't need witnesses, they need silence. Weeks later, on the far edge of the continent, a supply truck rolled into a small mountain village. Its driver stopped at a checkpoint that wasn't on any map. A woman in a faded scarf checked his manifest, nodded, and waved him through. He didn't notice the slight limp in her walk, or the way her right hand brushed instinctively against her side, the faintest trace of an old wound. If he had looked closer, he might have seen the calluses on her fingers, the kind that come from metal and memory. But he didn't, and she preferred it that way. The village was quiet. Goats on the hillside, children chasing dust, an old mosque bell clanging in the wind. Eva Rostova, or whatever name she was using now, lived in a small house near the ridge. She fixed radios for the locals, helped the schoolteacher translate old textbooks, taught the children how to listen for storms by the way the wind shifted. They called her Aunt Kestrel because she always seemed to know when trouble was coming. And she smiled not because they knew, but because they didn't. Every night, when the stars came out and the village fell quiet, she would climb the hill behind her home. There, half buried beneath the rocks, was a wooden crate. Inside, a disassembled rifle, oiled and sealed. Not a weapon anymore, a memory. She never opened it. She didn't need to. The wind still told her what she wanted to know. One evening, a figure arrived from the valley, a man in plain clothes, walking with the slow confidence of someone used to carrying authority he didn't want anymore. She saw him coming long before he reached the ridge. Raise. When he finally stood in front of her, he looked older, not from years, from the kind of truth that ages you faster. I knew you were alive, he said. She smiled faintly. You always did. He looked at the view, the endless sweep of mountains, the red line of sunset crawling along the peaks. So this is where the wind went. It needed somewhere quiet, she said. He nodded slowly. They built a story about you, said you died in the blast. They gave you a medal posthumously. Thorne refused to attend the ceremony. She looked down, amused. He never liked speeches. No, Ray said. He liked honesty, and he told them the truth before he retired, that you weren't dead, just done. Her expression softened. How is he? Ray's took a breath. He's gone, heart failure 2 months ago. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind moved softly between them, carrying the sound of distant bells. Finally, she whispered, he was one of the good ones. The last of them, Ray said. He reached into his coat and handed her a small envelope. He wanted you to have this. She hesitated before taking it. Inside was a photograph, faded, almost worn through. Their old unit, all of them younger, sunlight, laughter, no ghosts yet. On the back, in Thorne's shaky handwriting. The shot was never the miracle, you were. Her throat tightened. He always knew what not to say. Ray smiled. He did. They sat together until the sun disappeared. Are you happy here? He asked finally. She thought for a long moment. Happiness is a loud word, she said. I prefer peace. He nodded. You earned it. She looked at him, half smiling. No one earns peace. You just stop fighting yourself long enough to notice it's been waiting. Ray stood. You know, they still talk about you at the academy. New recruits study your ballistics like scripture. They call it the Kestrel equation. She raised an eyebrow. Equation. Wind, distance, and patience. That's what they think it means. She chuckled softly. They forgot the fourth variable. He tilted his head. What's that? Conscience. He smiled, knowing she was right. When he finally left, the road swallowed him like the years had swallowed their wars. She watched until his figure disappeared into the dusk, then turned back toward her small house. The world felt lighter somehow, as if a circle had finally closed. Months passed, seasons changed. The village learned to rely on her. The children brought her flowers, the elders asked her to bless the harvest. She wasn't a soldier anymore. She was part of something ordinary, something living. And yet some nights, She still woke before dawn, her heartbeat sinking to a rhythm only she could hear. A distant echo of recoil, of precision, of purpose. On those nights, she would step outside and stand in the cold, watching the horizon until the first light appeared. She never prayed, she just listened. To the wind. To the world she had once tried to save from itself. To the quiet truth that all soldiers eventually face. You can't kill ghosts, you can only outlive them. One morning, the schoolteacher climbed the hill to find her. "Miss Kestrel," he said, "a journalist came today. He says he's writing about the sniper from the Coastal War, the one they call the Wind." She smiled softly. "Is that what they call her now?" "Yes, he wants to know who she was." Eva looked at the horizon for a long time. Then she said, "Tell him she listened." The teacher frowned, listened. Yes, to orders, to silence, to the wind, to herself. Tell him that's why she never missed. He nodded, though he didn't understand. That night she sat by her window, candle flickering low. The photograph lay on the table beside the old patch and the letter. Outside, the wind moved gently through the hills. She whispered to it like an old friend. "You were right, General. It was never the shot. It was what came after." And for the first time, the wind didn't answer. It didn't have to. Years later, when her house was empty and her name had long since vanished from files and broadcasts, the villagers built a small marker on the ridge. A simple stone, unmarked, facing the direction the wind always came from. They said it belonged to a woman who once heard storms before they arrived, who taught them that calm isn't weakness, it's wisdom with the sound turned off. Sometimes children would leave wildflowers at the stone. Sometimes travelers would pause, feeling something in the air they couldn't quite name. And when the wind blew through that pass, soft, precise, alive, it sounded like a salute. Far away, in a military archive no one ever visits, a forgotten file sits inside a locked cabinet. The label reads, "RUSTOVA EVA, status, dismissed with honor." Inside, a single note in Thorne's handwriting. She didn't break protocol, she rewrote it. And somewhere beyond history, beyond rank, beyond orders, the wind still carries her name. Not as a soldier, not as a legend, just as a reminder. That strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. That the truest aim isn't toward a target, it's toward redemption. That the highest salute isn't given to the loudest warrior, but the quietest one who stayed true when no one was watching. Because sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.